welcome to our third evening of At Astra with Pride, Southeast Kansas Pride. We are so excited for you all to be here tonight. We have an amazing panel discussion. This is our sixth event of the week. Tomorrow we have our intersectionality panel at noon, led by Dr. Levitt from K-State. Then tomorrow night we have our Project Q&A Hangout, so you can register on our Facebook page, on the event page, and join us on Zoom. And we are going to be learning about what's going on with Project Q&A, playing some fun online games and getting to know everybody and connect with others, because it's really important in these times that we connect with friends and new friends. And then be sure to tune in on Saturday, September 12th at 6:30 p.m. for our main event. We have a wonderful lineup of drag performers, musicians, keynote speakers. We have a former Independence High School educator that's going to be speaking, as well as the Stonewall Inn co-owner, Stacy Lentz, so you won't want to miss it. And we have some celebrity guest appearances as well. But you all tuned in tonight for this wonderful panel discussion. We have activist Sandra Stenzel, Luke Bensimon, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, and Thomas Witt. And our leader of the panel is CJ Janovy.
Thank you, Brandon, and hi everyone who's watching. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm excited to be able to be with you virtually and to introduce you to these three fine folks who've joined us tonight. And I'm just so impressed with the work that all the LGBTQ folks and allies are doing in Southeast Kansas. It's been very inspirational for me to see, and I'm just proud of all of you, and thank you for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. Again, my name is CJ Janovy, and I wrote a book came out a couple years ago. It's called No Place Like Home, Lessons in Activism from LGBT Kansas. And that's why Brandon asked, I think, me to gather some folks to talk tonight about just what we've learned about activism in Kansas. And when I wrote this, so just real quickly, a little bit about me. I'm originally from Nebraska. I went to school on the West Coast. I went to grad school on the East Coast. I settled in Kansas City in about 1990, and I'm a journalist, and I've worked in Kansas City ever since then. And for those of you who were at the meeting on Tuesday when Tom and I spoke, I am wearing the same shirt, which is my knockoff Silence Equals Death shirt, and I wear it when I give talks. It's like I said, it's a knockoff, it's a new one, but I was around in the 80s when we wore the original versions, and that makes me 58 years old, and so I've sort of seen a lot of the LGBT movement, and I wear this shirt now because I think we're in just as desperate times as we were in the 80s. And so that's explaining my t-shirt, if anyone happened to notice. But the reason I wrote this book was in the mid 2000s, some of you may remember that the state of Kansas passed a constitutional amendment. Everyone in the state went to vote, and they passed a constitutional amendment saying that marriage was between one man and one woman. This was a 2-year effort in the state of Kansas. It sort of consumed politics in 2004, 2005. By the time it went to the ballot, 70% of the voters in Kansas voted against same-sex marriage. And this was crushing to me. I love the Midwest. I love this region. I love the landscape. I love everything about it. I knew it was a conservative place, but seeing that number, 70% of our friends, neighbors, family members, coworkers go to the ballot box and vote against us by that margin was super crushing. And Flash forward a couple of years, a few years, and I began to see stories out of places like Manhattan and Salina and Hutchinson, where people were going to City Hall and asking for non-discrimination ordinances to be on the ballot. And I thought, what is going on out in the middle of Kansas where you would not expect this? And so I started doing reporting, and I called Tom, who we'll hear from in a little bit. And I said, Tom, what's going on? Help me, connect me with some people who can help tell this story, because things were beginning to change all around the country. And by the time the US Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage all across the country in 2015, about 60% of Americans were perfectly fine with same-sex marriage. So in this 10-year span between the marriage amendment in Kansas and marriage being legalized nationally, there was almost a complete change in public opinion. And I argue in my book that one of the reasons for that is because people like Sandra and Luke and Tom did the work to change hearts and minds. And so basically that's sort of a short version of my book. You don't have to buy it now, because I will also say that some themes emerged from this book. And so I call it Lessons in Activism from LGBT Kansas. And basically, I drove all around the state and I talked to a lot of people and described a lot of situations. But so there's lessons all over the place, but there were three main things that came up. And so I always talk about this when I talk about the book. I say that the first lesson is prepare to lose. And I say that because there were so many efforts that people started, and maybe they wanted to win at the ballot box, or maybe they wanted to win at City Hall, and they lost the vote. But in the process of the campaign or the public, the media, the public conversation, the testimony at City Hall, lots of people learned things and friends emerged, and communities were built by these kinds of efforts, even when they ultimately lost. So you lose. In the process, you build communities, you make friends, and eventually you start winning. We see that in Kansas, which starts to happen, really kind of the action of my book ends around 2016. And what happens after that is we get a lesbian elected to Congress from the northeast part of the state. We send two people to the state, two openly gay people to the state legislature. Luke will talk in a minute about being a plaintiff in a case that to get the state to recognize gender identity on birth certificates. And so all of these efforts build momentum. So number one, prepare to lose. Number two, be gentle with your allies. We'll see, what I found in my book was, there's a lot of internal fighting about strategy and how to spend the money and, what's the best thing to do. And that, humans disagree sometimes, but a lot of times that internal fighting takes the focus off where the real effort should be. And I think especially in days of social media, it's really easy to call out people if they're not using the right language, or if they're not being, pure enough or whatever. And I think that keeping in mind who your allies are and being gentle with them is crucial if you want to make progress. And the third lesson is just do something. There were people that I met, Tom's one of them, and Sandra's one of them, Luke's one of them too, who are comfortable standing up on the steps of the state capitol with news cameras and everywhere, giving a speech to a couple hundred people. And then there's people who would never do that, but they'll send an anonymous check, or they'll bake lemon bars, or they'll just do something, whatever they can. And so those were the three lessons, really. Prepare to lose, be gentle with your allies, do something. And that's really where I'm going to stop now. And I'm going to toss it over to Sandra, who was really, when I started reporting for this book, one of the first people who really told me her story, and it was incredibly moving, and that's how I knew I had to write a book. So Sandra Stenzel, everyone.
Well, thanks, CJ. Um, I appreciate you, Brandon, setting this up and forming a channel for us to communicate with people. I have been at this a very long time, and not just in LGBT politics, but also in Democratic Party politics. I worked on my first campaign in 1974, which was Bill Roy's campaign for Senate. And I actually blame Bill Roy for Bob Dole because it was Bob Dole he was running against. But you know, a lot has changed since then. That I want to kind of give you a picture of how it was when I'm from Western Kansas. I'm from Waukegan, a little town in Trego County, west of Hays, between Hays and the Colorado border. And I spent 16 years living in Austin, Texas, which is really a wonderful place to live if you're a gay person, because you know, it's kind of a gay paradise. I mean, we were able to be out. There was not a lot of discrimination. Austin is a very welcoming community. And so I kind of forgot how things were in Western Kansas, first of all. And second of all, when I came back to Western Kansas with a girlfriend or had a girlfriend come visit me there or something, people didn't really seem to mind. I mean, it was sort of like, yeah, they knew, but nobody really cared. So I thought maybe things had changed. And excuse me, in 2001, my mother was getting older and I knew I was going to have to come back and take over the family farm. And so I did. And I got a job as director of economic development in Trego County. Everybody knew when they hired me that I was gay. It was not a big deal. You know, everybody just wanted me to do my job, and that's kind of how things were. Well, as time went on in 2004, 2003, things really changed. You know, in anticipation of the 2004 presidential election, Karl Rove and George Bush decided that they would win by stomping the hell out of gay people. That, you know, having these various marriage amendments on the ballot in different states across the nation was going to be their strategy for driving conservative voters to the polls. And so what happened was in 2004, every time I woke up and turned on the news, what I heard was that gay people were the worst people in the world. The republic was in danger because we were going to destroy it, and that if conservatives didn't get to the polls and pass all of these marriage amendments, the world was just going to end. Well, that seeped into my community, and that seeped into the people who funded me, the city of Waukegan and the Trego County government. And so shortly after I had gone to Topeka to testify in 2004, you know, in 2004 was when the first marriage amendment was introduced. And I knew I had to do something. I mean, I knew I had to get to Topeka. I couldn't just let this happen. We were under attack, and I knew where this was going to end. So after I testified, there was a group of 3 ministers that went to the Trego County County Commission and to the City Council of Waukegan and said, out in the open, said, we don't think a lesbian should be representing Trego County. We think she should be fired. Well, my board of directors said, that's nuts. She's doing a good job. I had brought in $3.6 million in grant money in 3 years. For every dollar that was spent on my office, I had returned 24 to the community. And there were these huge public meetings that they held. 150 people, 100 people would show up, and 90% of those people were in favor of me keeping my job. And yet I got fired. And they had to wipe out my entire office. They had to zero out my budget and wipe out both organizations so in order to get rid of me. And it was that important to do it. The reason I'm telling you that long story is because it was that public perception that we had to fight. That, here I was out in Trego County, kind of, punching above my weight. And Tom was in Wichita doing the same thing. Tiffany Muller was in Topeka doing the same thing. And we really didn't know each other. I mean, I was a member of the LGBT caucus of the Democratic Party. And that was really the only organizing point that we had, was the Democratic Party. And yet when it came to the 2004 vote on the marriage amendment, more Republicans voted our way than Democrats. And it was a Republican who kept it off the ballot. David Adkins single-handedly, with some parliamentary maneuvers, kept it off the ballot. I don't think any of that would have happened if it hadn't been for this national umbrella of, we need to drive conservatives to the polls, and the way we're going to do it is to get them to hate gay people. That was how things were back in 2004. Fast forward now to Trego County, and one of the biggest businesses in town is owned by a couple of gay guys. If you go to the bar there on Friday night, it looks like a gay bar, because after 10 o'clock, it's full of gay people who come from Hayes over to Waukegan. Nobody in Waukegan particularly complains about that. They all eat at Jake and Chet's Cafe. They don't mind the gay food, I guess. It's a different world in that sense externally, but internally, it's even more important that it's a different world. When Tiffany and I tried to find each other, it was through the LGBT caucus. When Tom found us, it was through the LGBT caucus and through the organizations that they had in Wichita. That was the biggest problem that we faced, trying to organize to keep the marriage amendment off the ballot, was we didn't know how to find each other. That was in the days before the internet. That was in the days when Liberty Press was really the only means of communications that we had. And so we had people that wanted to get involved, but there was no structure. They had no way to do it. In 2005, Tom and Tiffany and a whole bunch of other people around the state formed what is now known as Equality Kansas. And that has provided us a way to organize, to exert some political influence. And even inside the Democratic Party, even though we had an LGBT caucus, it was really difficult to exert any influence. Now, I think, people inside the party, the leadership of the party, would never think of doing the things that they did to us a decade ago. So, now it's easier for us to find each other. There are chapters of Equality Kansas all over the state. It's easier to find each other because of the internet. It's easier to find each other because we're not a taboo subject. We laugh all the time that, back in the early days when we wanted to endorse political candidates, they didn't want our endorsement. They asked us not to endorse them. Now they beat us up wanting our endorsements. I mean, people are really mad if they don't get the endorsement of the LGBT caucus or Equality Kansas or things like that. So, I think those are the biggest changes that I saw. Now it's easy to find each other. Now it's easier to organize because we have that structural framework in place. And the other thing is, we're not as afraid as we used to be. When I first started doing this work, it was still against the law for people who were of the same sex to have sex. Lawrence versus Texas had not yet happened. It was not yet legal. And I can remember I was dating a woman from Houston, and she said, well, I can't possibly be out. I could go to jail for having sex with you. And I'm thinking, well, okay, maybe technically, but it really was true. It wasn't until 2007 that changed. So gradually it's been changing, and looking forward, I think the things that we need to do are not are not give up. After Obergefell, after gay marriage was legalized, there's kind of a drop off in participation because people were sort of like, oh, well, now we've got what we want and we don't really have to do too much more. And that's just not the truth, that there's always something. When I got fired, people would stop me on the street and say, they can't do that. That's against the law. You need to sue them. Well, the truth is I couldn't sue them. I hired, someone who was licensed to practice before the Supreme Court. And he said, well, I'll take your case, but I'll tell you right now, you don't have a leg to stand on because it's legal to fire somebody for being gay, not for having gay sex, but for being gay. And I think that we need to get the word out about that. And certainly in Johnson County, we've had a lot of success getting non-discrimination ordinances passed, and it's not as big of a thing as it is in other locations. And I think we need to get the word out that it's still legal for us to be fired. It's still legal to not rent an apartment to us. It's still legal not to seat us in a restaurant simply because they believe us to be gay. So we've got to not let up. It's okay to take a break now and then, but we can't let up, because the minute we do, it'll go back to being the way it was. And I guess that's my final thought, is that it's never over. It is never over. No matter what you think, it is never over. The fight could start up again instantly. We are still defending the Voting Rights Acts of the mid-60s. What makes us think we're not going to have to defend gay marriage again? What makes us think we're not going to have to defend all of our rights again? So we always have to be vigilant. We always have to be prepared to move, and we always have to keep finding each other.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. One of the other surprises about activism in Kansas, as I was reporting, was that there were two highly visible women, trans women, who were also really hard at work throughout the state. Sandra Mead, who has since moved to California, and Stephanie Mott, who died a little over a year ago now. But through their work, I often would see Luke accompanying them. And then, Luke, as I mentioned earlier, was a plaintiff in a lawsuit to get gender identity on birth certificates in Kansas, and has done all sorts of additional work. And so, Luke, take it away.
Okay. Thanks for having me. First of all, Stephanie Mott was my mentor. So everything that I got into when it came to my activism was because of her. K-Step and Equality Kansas, I feel like I was there from the beginning. And at first I was not very active, I think because I was observing and I was really trying to find where I fit. I started working with Equality Kansas and I started doing stuff with K-Step, and I would always go do presentations with Stephanie, but I always felt awkward because my story is different than others. And she would always say, yeah, go, they need to hear your story. They already know mine. You need to go, they need to know your story. So I was always a little bit uncomfortable because my story is a whole different situation. So I started doing that. And I don't know if you guys remember Paula Kaiser. I received an email from her one day that said, this is more your speed. And it was I think it was an article or an advertisement about the founder of Black Trans Men, Inc. I went to the conference the first year, and well, the rest is history. I think my story is different to the factor of activism because of being a person of color. And as I stated earlier, if it wasn't for Stephanie opening those doors, certain doors, I probably would not have been able to get my foot through. So my activism was kind of, again, if it wasn't for Stephanie, I wouldn't be where I'm at. Oh God, I don't remember years, you'll have to forgive me. The case came about because I got a call from Lambda Legal in New York. And we talked briefly, and they talked to me briefly, and they said, well, we know that Stephanie had tried to, I guess, get her gender marker changed on her birth certificate. And her case, I guess she lost her case. So what they did was they put K-Step on as a plaintiff, myself, my big sister, Nyla Foster, and I think there were a couple of other plaintiffs. In the beginning, I wasn't for sure it was going to happen because, again, Kansas. So, yeah, I really want to say a few days after Stephanie passed, that's when I got the call from Lambda Legal. And so that was a victory. And I'm glad that that happened. Here lately, I've just been doing some stuff. My focus has really been BTMI, Black Trans Men, because there's an issue of trans women of color being killed. And we've had maybe 3 or 4 in KC. I'm not for sure the number. So one of my goals has been to truly educate non-people of color of what it's like to be a trans person of color. Because that's what BTMI teaches me. They teach us how to educate non-people of color what it's like to be a trans person of color. I was born and raised here. And honestly, when people say you're trying to make it about race, I'm really not trying to make it about race. My struggle here has been trying to pull in more people of color in the area, maybe wanting to help with some activist issues that I'm working on. But I kind of feel like I'm by myself, knowing that I'm not. I have plenty of support, but it's kind of tough for being an activist of color here in Kansas. I've had some situations where people did not think I was smart enough or didn't know what I was doing. I still get called a baby, which doesn't help me work with the things I need to work with. But I'm persistent on some things. We've had some victories, but we need more work. I don't know what else to really say. My struggle and my fight will always be for the LGBT community, but my focus and my passion is trans people of color. And there definitely needs to be change, not only in the support, but trying to pull in trans people of color to join my fight or help me. I'm not sure what else to say. Y'all have to forgive me because I'm really not here a lot, so mentally right now. So I'm doing the best I know how to do.
Luke, could I ask you a question?
Yes.
What would you say? I know that it's been what you're saying about having a challenge of finding people to join you in the fight, trans people of color specifically in Kansas. If there are trans people of color watching this who want to get involved, but they're hesitant for whatever reason, what would you tell them?
They can reach out to me through Facebook. I'll have a lot of people that have reached out to me, but nothing has ever come about. So they can reach out to me through Facebook for right now. That's the easiest way. That's pretty much it.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Luke. I know you're thinking about some family stuff today, so we're sending love.
Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Tom Witt, who some of you, I'm imagining, heard from also on Tuesday. And so I won't, for those of you who were not on that call on Tuesday, Tom is the director of Equality Kansas, and he's been at work doing very difficult work in Kansas for a long time, and we owe a lot to him. So you're up, Tom.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you, Brandon, and all of you tuning in for Southeast Kansas Pride. So tonight's focus is on personal stories, which is something I'm not so good at. But my background is in computer science. That's what my degree is in, from San Francisco State way back in the ancient days of computing. And that's the industry I worked in until 2004. I was writing software and fixing people's busted networks. And then in early March of 2004, we're watching the local news, and two crazy people come on the TV in my living room. And they start talking about how those homosexuals shouldn't be permitted around children and shouldn't be having children. And I didn't know who the hell they were. They were just crazy people on my television. And I look at my husband, and I look at our daughter, and it's like, no, this is bullshit. And they were two legislators who I later got to know as Tim Huelskamp, who some of you may be familiar with, and Jan Pauls, a fake Democrat who wrote most of the anti-gay legislation in the state of Kansas over a 20-year period. I started looking for ways to get involved to try to stop the marriage ban that Sandra spoke about. And here in Wichita at the time in 2004, there were no organized advocacy groups for the LGBT community. There was nothing. In other cities around the state, there were kind of loosely organized groups, but nobody communicated well with one another. And sometimes there were turf wars across city boundaries. And so that was the environment in 2004 and 2005. And of course, the marriage ban passed in April of 2005. And immediately after passage, those of us that had been working in our individual communities with our individual groups to try to slow it or stop it, or at least put a dent in it, we spent the rest of 2005 figuring out how to be more organized in the state of Kansas. And what we ended up agreeing to do was dissolve all of our independent organizations. And so on October 5th of 2005, there was this huge conference in Emporia, and representatives from LGBT organizations all over the state, we went into a room and agreed to dissolve our local organizations and reform as chapters of the new, what's now Equality Kansas. And since then, I have been, well, starting in 2005, working first as a volunteer lobbyist. Now, I'm the paid staff for Equality Kansas, and I'm the lobbyist in Topeka at the State House and the legislature. And every January, I pack my things here in Wichita. I'm in my Wichita office right now. You can see our lovely flags behind me here in the office. And I pack up my things and I move to a tiny little apartment 2 blocks from the Capitol. And while the legislature is in session, I'm there in that building making sure that they aren't trying to screw us over again. And trust me, every single year, there are multiple anti-LGBT bills that are introduced that get hearings, that get amended onto other bills. And so far, it's been 16 years. Since the marriage ban, only 2 anti-LGBT bills have passed. The first was if you're a student at any of the Kansas universities, you pay a student fee, a mandatory student fee. Part of that student fee supports campus student organizations. Well, now those student organizations that you pay a mandatory fee for can kick you out for being queer, and they call it religious freedom. And then in 2018, there was a bill that will allow adoption agencies to deny placement of adoptable and foster children in LGBT households. And that passed by exactly 1 vote. And that was a pretty crushing loss that day. But we've been able to push back on pretty much everything else. The first bills that we put a stop to in 2006, there was a bill that was going to try to limit adoptions to married couples only. Of course, if in 2006, since queers couldn't get married, that's who it was aimed at. It was aimed at us. We managed to stop that from getting a hearing. And then in 2008 through 2009, we were going to cities and trying to get domestic partnership registries passed. And we were successful in Lawrence, and in response, the legislature tried to pass a bill that would have banned domestic partnership registries in Kansas cities. We beat that on the floor of the House on a 64 to 56 vote, killed it right there. And then starting in 2010, we started working on pushing local non-discrimination ordinances to add sexual orientation and gender identity to city non-discrimination laws. And in response, the same people who tried to ban us from adopting, who wrote the marriage ban, who wrote the domestic partnership ban, they came up with a new kind of bill that would have stopped us from passing non-discrimination ordinances at the local level. And we killed the one in 2011, we killed the one in 2012, we killed the one in 2013, we killed the one in 2014, and then they quit trying to mess around with the local non-discrimination ordinances. They've given up and gone on to other things. Those other things now are attack trans people. Up until the Obergefell ruling in the summer of 2005, the right wing didn't even know transgender people existed. And then the Obergefell decision happened in June, and by September, the new monster under the bed were transgender people, particularly little kids in public schools that had to go pee. And there have been, since 2016, there have been 5 different bills, 6 now, trying to restrict what trans kids can do in public schools, whether it's go to the bathroom, play in sports, or participate fully in daily school life. 2 of the bills would have put, and I'm not making this up, you can't make this stuff up, it would have put a $2,500 bounty on the head of any gender nonconforming child caught using the wrong bathroom, so to speak. If one child saw a gender nonconforming child in the bathroom, they could go to the principal, file a claim, and the state would have to pay them $2,500 for the horror of having been in a bathroom while other children were peeing. We've managed to stop those bills from getting hearings, fortunately. We explained to legislators that you let these bills loose, and you all remember what we were like in middle school and junior high school. And there are little kids who are going to get hurt if this kind of stuff passes. And they listened. And the reason they listened is because, as we've been talking about, we organized back in 2004 and 2005. We found each other, and we got put together the resources to keep a lobbyist in the state house whenever the legislature is in session, and that being me. And having somebody there full time, and the same person building relationships, even with some fairly extreme conservatives, means that when I go talk to them, or when one of you comes up to the State House and I take you to talk to the legislators from your district, they're going to listen, where 10, 15 years ago, they wouldn't give us the time of day. When I first started, I spent 3 or 4 years in that building shunned. Corporate lobbyists, most legislators, legislative staff would walk past me in the halls without giving me a second glance or looking me in the eye. It was tough to get meetings. There was one leader on the Republican side who claimed to be a moderate, but to meet him, we had to go to a cafe in the far southwest corner of Topeka where none of the regular Capitol people hung out because he didn't want to be seen with me. That's what it used to be like. Now, things have changed. We've watched the world change in the past 15 years. You know, as Sandra was saying, you know, it was easy to beat up on the queers in 2004 and 2005. And we've proven pretty resilient. We're not so easy to beat up on. You know, I talk about stopping a lot of bills, bad bills. I grew up in Northern Illinois. I learned how to skate before I learned how to ride a bicycle, and played a lot of hockey as a kid. And a lot of times I feel like a goalie up there stopping the other side from their shots. We don't get a lot done positively. The other side manages to stop most of our initiatives, but at least by holding the line in the State House, that gives us the ability to work in local communities. We've got domestic partnership registries, although they're no longer needed because of the Supreme Court ruling on marriage. We have non-discrimination ordinances in 21 Kansas cities. There's 3 million people in this state. 1.1 million of us live in a city that has a fully inclusive non-discrimination ordinance. And just this spring in the city of Roland Park, which is a small bedroom community up by Kansas City, we managed to pass the first local ordinance banning conversion therapy on minors. And so while we hold the stuff off at the state level in the state legislature, that gives the people in our chapters and our allies in the local communities the time and the space that they need to work locally to get these policies passed that protect us from discrimination, that protect our children from so-called conversion therapy, and, you know, before marriage, that gave us some rudimentary relationship recognition through domestic partnership registries. And, you know, we have chapters. We've got 8 active chapters right now. We're always looking to help people start new chapters. We do not have a chapter in Southeast Kansas. We did back in 2011 and 2012. The people who were leading it moved on. If anybody that's watching would like to help start a chapter in Southeast Kansas, you know, look up Equality Kansas on Facebook or eqks.org on the web and send us a message, and we'd be more than happy to help you get started. You're muted, CJ. There you go.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks, everyone. Brandon, does anyone have any questions or any comments for us?
We had a few questions in the chat. This is back for Sandra. You mentioned a lot of challenges then when you guys were forming and starting to fight. What would be one of the biggest challenges now? I think you might be muted.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is people thinking other people are doing the work and that they don't need to. We need everybody. We need every single warm body to keep the work moving forward. And people say, well, you know, Sandra's got it handled in the Democratic Party and Tom's got it handled in the State House, and, you know, other people, Brett Hadel has it handled in Kansas City, whatever. you know, we need to keep a constant flow of leadership coming, and people are welcome. I mean, sometimes people think, well, you know, I don't know anything. I'm not anybody, you know, maybe there's nothing I can contribute. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We need everybody. So I think that's our biggest challenge going forward.
This one's chat for Luke. Uh, what? Gotta read my notes here. What tips do you have for straight white allies to help trans people of color in their fight?
That's a good question. I always tell people to sit down and talk with a trans person of color, to, you know, try to understand what their struggles or differences may be, and just be supporting. That's pretty much the advice that I give, because I go by, when people are reaching out to people to network, to get to know other people or to connect with other people, they meet other people in the group that they're trying to support. So I encourage, like, talking to a trans person of color, you know, finding out some of their struggles and what the differences are.
And so in Southeast Kansas, we are very rural. Is there like groups on Facebook that people could reach out to find trans people of color or to talk to?
Well, I need to do some more research on that, because most of the groups that I'm in are specifically are associated with Black Trans Men Inc. I'm gonna look for some more like groups where allies can join and kind of just talk to people and get to know them. How I found things was I just went on Facebook and I searched it, you know, so.
And then there's another question for you. What can the youth do in their own community to gain the backing they need for trans visibility?
Huh. Well, I guess try to figure out what you're passionate about and try to support it. I know there's a youth group here in Topeka. I'm not sure when they meet, but there's a youth group here in Topeka that meets at the library. That's a start, because everything that I do as an activist is not about me, because I'm strong and resilient. This is about the youth, so that when I can't do this anymore, they can come in behind, and you know what I mean.
Luke, would you say that a first, I mean, how would people find each other? Like, if I'm a straight ally who wants to listen to a trans person of color tell their story, could I just go on YouTube and Google, you know, trans people of color speakers, or what?
Actually, yes. I didn't think so until I started actually going on YouTube and watching. There's certain members of Black Trans Men Inc. and Black Trans Woman Inc. They have YouTube channels, whether they started out talking about their journeys or whether they are talking about issues and things that affect the Black trans community. Yes, there's stuff on YouTube. There's stuff on YouTube for sure.
And if there's, like, you know, 2 or 3 trans people in Southeast Kansas who think they're the only ones, how would they find each other?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Most of the time, the way some of them find me is that they've either seen me speak somewhere or they remember Stephanie Mott making a reference to me, and that's how they found me. I'm really trying to work on a strategy to get to be a little bit more open, so that if there's a trans person of color that wants to get a hold of me, that's interested in doing some stuff, that can happen. You know, We are, there's still trans women dying and still, what I mean? So there's a lot of that going on in the community right now. But yeah, that's how I've been reached out to. That's how I reach out to some. If I haven't met somebody and they're of color, I reach out and find out what they're doing.
Hey, Luke,
Yes.
should I put a discussion of this on our Sunday chapter conference agenda?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do that.
Appreciate it.
We have one more question, and this one's for Thomas. What is the best thing someone could do to talk to their when they talk to their legislator? What could they say or do?
Be yourself, be honest, tell your personal story. And let me kind of broaden that a little bit. When the first day I set foot in the State House was the first day of the session in January of 2005. I'd never been in the state capitol before then. And in my head, I imagined that to talk to a state representative or a senator, that there would be layers of bureaucracy and impossible to get in to talk to anybody important. And what I discovered was the most astounding thing in the world. You just walk in. There is nobody to stop you from walking into these offices and talking to these legislators. They have secretaries, but the secretaries are more there to direct traffic than they are to keep you from talking to a legislator. And if you can't talk to a legislator in their office, you find out what committees they're in, because they're in the same rooms every day for their committee hearings. You stalk them outside the committee hearings and you talk to them in the hallways, whether you're standing around or on the move, like, they show in West Wing, if there's any hardcore political junkies here. The easiest thing in the world is to talk to a lawmaker. They're politicians, and even the really bad ones are usually easy to talk to. There are exceptions, but they don't get elected by being off-putting. So don't be afraid to talk to these people. It's very easy to do.
I would add also that it's very easy to look up your legislator and look at how they vote on things and you can find their contact information. It's all right there on the Kansas Legislature website, and you need to communicate with legislators, because it's like Sandra said, don't assume that somebody else is communicating for them. When I talk to legislators, they say, all my constituents are emailing me and they're all saying this thing. And I'm pretty sure that they're only hearing one side of the story.
Another thing, when we first started this, and I mentioned this the other evening as well, I would go talk to legislators who would tell me, well, I don't have any of your people in my district. So I would get some of the people from their district and send them in to talk to them. And, if like CJ just said, if we're not communicating with them, they A, don't know we exist, B, don't care. And it really doesn't take a lot to get a legislator's attention. 3 emails or phone calls, not form stuff, but 3 genuine emails or phone calls means people are paying attention to an issue. 20 emails or phone calls is a crisis. 100 emails or phone calls is hair on fire, the world's coming to an end. It doesn't take a lot to get their attention. So write them, call them. If you want to talk to them in person, contact my office at, go to eqks.org and contact me, because I can help you, during legislative session, make appointments and get in to see these people.
I think that's all the questions we had in the chat. Did you have any more, CJ?
I think we're probably reaching the end of our time. And so I just want to thank Tom and Luke and Sandra for sharing their stories tonight. And I want to thank you, Brandon, for inviting us. And I want to thank everyone who's tuning in, not just to this workshop, but to everything that you're doing with Southeast Kansas Pride all week. It's I just think it's really cool what's happening in Southeast Kansas, and I hope to be there in person next time.
Well, thank you all for joining us. It was a wonderful evening, and thank you for everybody that logged on and watched this evening, and have a good evening. We hope to see you tomorrow at our noon workshop.